Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. I'm Christina Joy, our events coordinator. We are here at Sankofa with Dr. Kris Marsh, the author of the evening. Give it up for Dr. Kris Marsh, y'all.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sankofa welcomes you. You know, we've been here since 1997. You know, just hair flip on that because, you know, they be trying to take out black businesses, y'all, especially DC, especially right now. So we are here and we are grateful to have you here with us. I'm going to read your lovely bio before we get into this great discussion on the Love Jones Cohort, single and living alone in the Black middle class. All right, so Dr. Kris Marsh is an associate professor of sociology at the University of Maryland. Previously, Professor Marsh was a postdoctoral scholar at the Carolina Population Center at the University of North Carolina, a visiting researcher at the University of Southern California, and a Fulbright scholar in South Africa at the University of
Witwatersrand. It's the Dutch.
What?
They call it Wits for short.
Witwatersrand.
Witwatersrand.
Yes. And the University of Johannesburg. Professor Marsh's areas of expertise are the Black middle class, demography, racial residential segregation, and education. Welcome, Dr. Marsh.
Thank you for having me again. So excited to be here. Super excited.
Yes. I already told you the story, but I'm going to tell y'all this story. But I literally saw Dr. Marsh's book on our shelves like a few months ago, and I was like, oh my God, what is this? I need to do an event with this book. I hadn't read a word out of the book. I just picked it up and I found her on Instagram and DM'd her immediately. Because one, you know, we've been having this conversation, but we haven't had this conversation. We're not when we talk about the Black middle class and we talk about dating specifically or marriage or being single, like all of those things, we're often talking about personal responsibility and the lay of the landscape, so to speak, right? I think that people start teasing out that there are structural things at play in our dating pool, but they're not understanding that is like the whole issue, like the entire issue, not just like, they're like, oh, it's like an additional thing. Like, no, it's like the whole thing. And that's like the simplest way I could say this. So one, I want to start out with why, I know the answer to this because I've been watching a lot of interviews, but why you choose to study the Black middle class.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through a long journey to answer that very short question. And the reason why I think the long journey is kind of important is because you have the bio on the back of the book, and it just says, you know, the pedigree of what I've done. But there's some swerves, there's some detours that I've taken along the way. Michelle Obama talks about those swerves and those detours. And so I just want to tell you some of the things that are in between the lines that you don't see on my bio and how I got to where I am now. So I'm actually from Los Angeles. Anybody from the West Coast? LA? Like, look, we got LA in the house? Like, okay. I grew up middle class, and for a long time I did not say that I was middle class. Part of the reason why is I thought, like, you know, if you were Black and middle class, you weren't like authentically Black. And so I struggled with that. I was like, oh no, I have to struggle. You have to struggle. That's what Black really means. I was like, listen, I will gladly say I'm second generation Black middle class. And my parents, so much so that it was a foregone conclusion I was going to go to college. My parents were paying for college. My parents said, either you can pick the major or you can pick the university. Or they picked the major and I picked the university. At the ripe age of 17, I was like, it's easier to switch majors, so I'm going to pick the university. I went to San Diego State. It was a party school. But my parents made me major in business. Because they were paying for my college education, they had some skin in the game as to what I was going to do. I was a business major. I realized I did not like business. After my first semester, I was on academic probation. I'm sure none of you know what that means. What that means is that your grades... So that's what that means. For those that don't know, I'm sure some of y'all just don't know. What that means is that your grades are so low, they put you on academic probation. After my first year, I was academically disqualified from the university. And then my parents, I called my parents. I was like, I want to be a grown up. I want to get a real job. I want to pay my own tuition. Please don't pay my tuition. They couldn't pay my tuition because I wasn't at San Diego State, so I couldn't have them paying for school, and I wasn't there. So I got a job, my first job at Bank of America. I went to a junior college, and there was a professor there. His name was Philip Gay. And he was like, Kris, you have a sociological imagination. You should go get a PhD in sociology. I wanted to be a pilot because there were height restrictions. Anybody under 5 feet couldn't be a pilot. So I wanted to be a pilot. But I appreciate Philip Gay because Philip Gay said to me, I could be a professor and I could be a PhD. I literally was like, what's a PhD? How do you spell that? Let me Google that. But it's important because had Philip Gay said, Kris, you're not really cut out for college, who knows where I would be and what I'd be doing. So I get back into San Diego State. I got all A's, but you know when you drop your GPA dropped so low. I think I might have graduated with a 2. You feel me, with a 2.5, maybe a 2.6. So then I was trying to go on to graduate school. I eventually finally got to the University of Southern California. And one of the things I decided early on in my academic career, and I say it everywhere I go, I was not going to pimp the poor to make my academic career. You have people that don't look like me that spend their whole entire careers talking about poor Black Americans. I'm a woman of faith. The Bible even talks about how the poor will be with us for all time. But I wanted to look at people who had quote unquote done everything right. They went to college, they got the big degrees, they got the big houses, they got the big salaries, but their outcomes still look different than other racial and ethnic groups, in particular whites. Because some people want to argue that structural racism doesn't exist. And so I wanted to make an apples to apples comparison. So all of my research, one way or another, focuses on the Black middle class, avenues into the Black middle class, and consequences of being in the Black middle class. Did my PhD at the University of Southern California, finished up there, went to the University of North Carolina. My PhD is actually talking about segregation patterns of Black middle class households. But when I got to the University of North Carolina, and during my time at the University of Southern California, I realized that there was a demographic shift. There was a rise in singlehood and a rise in households that didn't have, they weren't married and didn't have any children. And I was like, I think this is something that social scientists really don't have a good handle on. Media had a really good handle on it. Love Jones is one of the movies where we see the demographic shift away from this heteronormative two-parent households to young Black professionals who aren't married, don't have any children. So I wrote a lot of quantitative work. So I'm actually a demographer. So I build statistical models. I get super excited when all the data comes out from the Census Bureau. I did that. I was promoted as a professor there at the University of Maryland. Having failed out of undergrad and then coming to Maryland, being the first Black female demographer that's been tenured at the University of Maryland, having the opportunity to go to South Africa to be a Fulbright. In case you don't know, President Obama actually had to approve me to be an ambassador of education in another country, and South Africa was a country. I still have that email in my inbox saying, you've been approved to be a Fulbright to go to South Africa. Then I come back and I write a book, and my book is in the top academic press in the world. I do not say that to brag. What I do, the reason why I say that is because there's so many different lines in between the bio that you just don't see and you just don't hear. And so I just want to give you a little bit more context about who I am and how excited I am to be in the top academic press in the country, in the world. And I'm talking about Black folks that are single and living alone. And so that is why I want to study Black middle class, because I think it's really important to understand that there is a group who, that in spite of it all, they've done so much, but their outcomes still don't always look the same. And so I want to keep having that conversation. And I get pushback all the time. It's like, well, why study the Black middle class? It's such a small subset of Black America, but they are a subset. If we want to understand all of Black America, we got to understand the Black poor, and we also have to study the Black middle class or the Black elite. And so that's where I insert myself into the academic conversation. I told this was going to be a long answer to a very short question. And I don't apologize.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. Because I appreciate that. Now, as we consider the definition of middle class, right? Because there's, it looks really different for many people, and it has changed. Even in the time since you've written the book, like since you started doing the research for this book.
Yes.
So it's like, I guess identifying as middle class growing up, simply because I lived in a 2-parent household for most of my childhood in a house that they owned. We were not like middle class by any means. We were working class in a house. But you know, you do have some type of, even though both my parents didn't like finish college their first time, I personally knew I was going to go to college, regardless of what anybody said, or because that's what I saw as the way to get away from what I'm seeing is people who don't know how to take care of a house. Right. So let's figure that out elsewhere at college. So coming to Howard, I get introduced to Black wealth, the real Black middle class, and understanding that Black people do have real money and not just like random people here and there. Like there's a whole community of that, and that was truly like never. I never heard of Jack and Jill until I went to Howard. Like knew none of that life at all, and so then you start kind of learning more about it, but you're realizing people don't really talk about it. People aren't trying to really talk about it. People are way more interested in the Black poor, and with good reason, obviously, because the Black poor need help, and all Black people need help, really, but them the most because the way poverty's set up.
Right, and I think that's a really great statement that you're making. I think it's also really important for us to understand, like being Black in America is hard, period, full stop. And so poor Black Americans need certain kind of resources, they need certain kind of help. But I think it shouldn't be lost on us that Black middle class need resources and help too. I think the assumption is you're Black and you're middle class and you've arrived. And now you're able to buy yourself out of your race and you don't have to deal with like racism or gender racism or anything like that. It's different, but it's still present. And that's why I think it's important to have both conversations. But I think it's also important that if we're going to talk about the Black poor, it has to be done in thoughtful kind of ways. You have people that don't look like us, that have made their entire career. And I think it's quite insidious because a lot of these things are historical, right? And then, so you've done these things to Black Americans. And then you come in and write about them and do research on them and make your whole entire career on them. Yeah, miss me. I don't want to be that kind of
scholar. And then they want to look like, oh, look at what we found out. Right. About what we were doing to y'all.
And they become the expert.
And they continue to publish books on it. And then we wonder, well, how come a Black person hasn't written about this?
Right.
Because all these white people are writing about it.
Right, and there's no space for us to write. The book took 7 years to write. I collected the data in 2015. The same year that I collected data, I started doing implicit bias training with police officers. I do not want to get my blood pressure up, so do not ask me any questions about that in the Q&A, please, and thank you. But with that being said, so it was really hard. I didn't have a lot of bandwidth to train the officers in the morning and then go home and write on the book. It was hard. So it took me much longer than I thought it was going to take to get the book done. I thought I quit the police department. They said they fired me. I don't care. I just know we're not working together anymore. So it's more sense. I think it was Percent Michelle. Blame it on me, that's fine. I was like, just make sure you know we're not together. So I finally finished the first version of the book. I think I finished it, I can't remember what year it was, but I'm from LA. And so I submitted the book. I submitted the first draft. I wish I could bury it, burn it, bury it again, and burn it again. The first draft was terrible. I got my first set of revisions the same day that Kobe Bryant died. Kobe Bryant is a basketball player in LA, for those that may not know. And I had tears beating up under my chin. And my family was like, you are a really big Kobe Bryant fan, aren't you? I couldn't tell them I had just got a 15-page single-space review from Cambridge on all the revisions that I had to do. To contextualize it, reviews are typically about 3 pages. I got 15 pages single space. I ate Oreo cookies and Haagen-Dazs ice cream and cried, not necessarily in that order. But then I woke up the next morning with my eyes swollen with a tummy ache, right? Still devastated that Kobe Bryant had passed away. But then I realized if the book was horrible, they would have written a half a paragraph and said, Cambridge isn't publishing this. They said this book has potential, and then gave me a 15-page roadmap for me to follow. And now this is the output of the 15-page roadmap. Now I had to write in the middle of COVID. Some days were good, some days were bad. We're going through a global pandemic. But one of the things that was really important to me, Part of the reason why the book took extra time is because I wanted to, and I say it in the preface of the book, this is a politics of citation book. And what I mean by that is I'm citing Black scholars that are talking about Black families. Here's what we know. Black scholars are the least cited of all academics. When you start talking about Black women, the numbers are even lower. So I wanted to be thoughtful. I wanted to be diligent, and I wanted to do my due diligence and make sure that I cited as many young Black scholars as I could, or young Black scholars that were talking about Black families. So it took me extra long because I put that extra energy and effort into it. But I wrote the book that I wanted to write. So much so that I said, I'm going to write even though I had the 15-page roadmap, I said, if Cambridge decides, again, top press in the world, if Cambridge decides that they're not going to publish this book, I'm okay with this. I'm not going to sell my soul to Cambridge to get the book written. I wrote the book that I wanted to write. Cambridge absolutely loved it. They said it's novel, it's going to make waves, all this kind of like great stuff, and it's doing exactly what it's doing, so I'm super excited that I took the extra time to write the book.
That, first of all, that's powerful. Well, yeah, sweet clap for that. Like, getting that revision, you know, I loved hearing that because, one, I hate revising anything. I hate it. It's the worst for me. It's like, it's so, I have to do it. But, you know, but having that and then getting that rejection feeling from the revision, but then realizing, wait, this must be good because they...
Right, because they spent
took
so
time
much
to sit here and tell me how to make this better.
Yeah.
Which is like, oh,
yeah.
Wow.
But so even in that very thoughtful story about, you know, I wrote the book I wanted to write, I had finished up the copy edits and we were getting ready to go to press. And I was like, okay, pull it. I was like, I want them to pull it. I'm not ready. I had an anxiety attack, whatever you want to call it. I was like, no, because here's the thing. Your thoughts, your writing are your own personal thoughts. These are my thoughts on pen and paper. And I was like, I did not want to open myself up for attacks. I was like, there were two soft spots in the book that I thought people were going to attack me. And no one has attacked me in those two soft spots. And I'll circle back to that in a second. But right before like we were going to release, I was like, I don't want to do this. I absolutely don't want to do this. And then I said, you know what? I had to talk to one of my girlfriends. Again, Oreo cookies and Haagen-Dazs ice cream. That's kind of like the running theme through this whole entire process. I had some Oreo cookies and Haagen-Dazs. And she's like, you just want people, you want to spark a conversation. You don't want everybody to agree with what you say. You want to be able to have a conversation. And people don't agree. I get hate mail all the time, quite often.
Right. Because people are talking about you don't want to, you're against the Black family and this, that, and the third. But that's not even what this book is about.
Right, and I think people just see single in the title, and they think I'm saying, oh, Black women don't need no Black men, and da-da-da-da. They just make a whole set of assumptions. And then they go to the University of Maryland, they scroll down to sociology, scroll down to M's, to the Marshes, and then they're writing me this big, long, nastygram about how I'm bad for Black America, I'm not promoting Black love, this is the reason why we have so many single-parent households. Did you hear me say anything about single-parent households at all? And I'm like...
Mind you, the demographic doesn't even have children that you're talking about.
Right.
Somewhere wild.
Did you read the book? But everybody needs to be married. And so that what I'm trying to get people to understand in the book, one of the things I'm trying to do, so I push back and I'm saying, oh, to the contrary, I actually am supporting Black love. I'm having us think about Black love in more nuanced kind of ways. It doesn't have to be a mother, father, 2.5 kids and a black picket fence. Let's think about a person who is single and living alone, and that being like a family and how we think about family. I think family in some ways is a very antiquated term, and we need to be more inclusive of how we think about family. So I'm supporting Black love. I'm saying, let's open up the parameters just a bit. But even though I say that, people still have their assumption. I'm just like anti-marriage, I'm anti-Black love, and I'm like, I'm none of those things. I say it in the book, and even though I say it in the book, sometimes people still push back and be like, yeah.
To that point, well, I guess to a bunch of points, because we went through, you went through a lot. But to the point of you using, I like the way that you started out, one, how you came to the Love Jones Cohort as your term, but also how, like, you recognizing in the culture that there was a shift in the media before we were recognizing that the rise of singlehood, you know, especially around the time that you were doing the research for the book, around 2014, 2015, all the headlines, you know, 70% of Black women are single, this, that, and third. That whole landscape is going on. And I would add, you're familiar with being Mary Jane?
Yes.
Oh, goodness gracious. Between shows like that, shows like Girlfriends, where Black women, like you say, I've seen you say many times, are showing everyone how to be single.
Right.
And that's significant.
Yes.
But now we're not really getting our flowers for that. Can you speak more on that?
Okay, so yes, I surely can. 2 points I want to make. So the book is trying to do a couple of different things. 2 main things that I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to destigmatize singlehood. I think what happens so often is that all these social institutions push us into being married and being partnered. And what happens is that people don't want to hold the title of single because people think something's wrong with them. So they end up in these relationships that are toxic, abusive, oppressive, and unfulfilling simply because they don't want to hold the title of single. So I'm trying to destigmatize singlehood and allow people to live confidently, stand confidently in their singleness. That does not mean that I'm not promoting Black love or Black marriage, but I think it's very important that we're happy, healthy, and whole as individuals first before we get into relationships. People often make marriage a panacea. Let me just get married. You a hot mess. And if there weren't any Christians in here, I'd be like, you a hot ass mess. But I can't say that because there's some Christians in here, so I can't say that. But if I could, I would. But it happens more often than not. So the book, and I appreciate it because like a lot of my college students are like, thank you, Dr. Marsh. I don't have this narrative. All my parents are like, hey, go to college, get yourself an MRS degree. Forget the PhD, forget the MD, forget the MBA. It's like, get the MRS degree. So I'm just trying to give another narrative for us to have conversation around. But now I also understand that there's a rise in singlehood globally. This is not just a U.S. phenomenon. This is not just a Black phenomenon. But now, some of y'all not gonna know this, but some of y'all are. If you remember the show Murphy Brown, some of y'all will like Google it later. So sometimes when Black Americans do certain things, it's pathologized, right? Single parenthood. Murphy Brown decided to become a single mother. Now it's hot, sexy, it's the in vogue thing to do. I think the same thing is happening in the singlehood scholarship. You have a lot of whites that are choosing to be single, in particular white women are choosing to be single. And so now the scholarship has a white face or a white gaze. And it's really funny, and I say this everywhere I go. I'm like, all of my friends and colleagues who are in the singlehood scholarship, they know my argument before I even get in the door. When they see me coming, they're like, oh, there go Kris with the race conversation. I'm like, yes, the Black woman is bringing the race conversation. Black women have been doing singlehood for quite some time. Whether or not it is by choice or it is by force, you are going to pay respect, give homage, and understand that we are the trailblazers. So the book is an ode and a love story to Black women to say, I see you, here are your flowers. Because the scholarship now has a white gaze. I was like, nah, not on my watch. Absolutely not on my watch. So it was really important that I made sure that people understood that Black women really have paved the way. But it's also important, which is the third major argument I'm trying to make in the book. I am a sociologist. So because I am a sociologist, we think about structure. And so I'm trying to get people to understand that structural forces constrain our personal choices. Put differently, racism and gender racism constrain our personal choices. To give you an example so you understand what I'm saying, if I, Kris Marsh, want to marry another Black male PhD, my dating pool is constrained. If I want to marry another Black male PhD who owns his own home, my dating pool is constrained. If I want to marry another Black male PhD who owns his own home, makes $150,000 and has estate planning, my dating pool is constrained. Stop asking me while I'm single. It's not an individual conversation. I think it's unfortunate that we always ask single folks, why are you single? And we don't ask married folks, why are you married? After reading this book, I hope you're just as likely to ask married folks, why are you married, as we are to ask single folks. It's a structural conversation. It's not an individual conversation. And if we keep asking people why they're single, they're going to think, woe is me, something's wrong with me. Maybe I really am batshit crazy. But the reality is you have to understand whether or not you're single by choice or by force, your dating pool is in fact constrained. And that's what the book is really trying to do. I'm trying to destigmatize singlehood. I'm trying to show that Black women have been doing it. And I'm also trying to show that there's a structural conversation that has to be in tandem with singlehood. It has to be. To do anything less, it's like we really are just coming down on Black professional Black women. That's not the kind of research I want to do. And that's not the kind of scholar that I will ever be. Right.
Right. I was like,
Thank you.
But yeah,
okay, so one of the
so you had God, I you just said. So going back to I don't think you said this yet, but the concept of augmented families.
Oh, yes.
I think I've seen I think now that people are using your not necessarily your concept of augmented therapy families, but the same concept with a different term, chosen families.
Yes.
And I feel like I've seen that modeled more and more in our media, in terms of, for me, Grey's Anatomy is one of my favorite shows. It's written by a Black woman. Obviously, we know Shonda Rhimes created it. But if you're a super fan of Grey's like I am, you will pay attention and see that Meredith has a chosen family, and she has her biological family that she had to create later on. But because she had always had because she had grown up in a family of a broken family, she didn't necessarily value her blood family and was constantly creating an augmented family of sorts, or the work family, the chosen family, even down to the mother and father figures. So I would assert one. This concept is growing. We see it a lot more often now, and it's not as uncommon as we think. But what I was interested in was the fact that you said that women do it better.
Yes.
And that it seems that men are having trouble creating these same type of systems outside of themselves as they're single and they age. Can you talk more about that?
Okay, so this is going to be a slightly longer answer to a short question. But I need to give you a little context. So to the point that I was making earlier, there were two arguments in the book that I thought people were going to push back on. One is this notion about so there's a theoretical framework that I use, and it's called intersectionality. So I'm saying it's not that I'm Black and a woman, I'm a Black woman, and you can't disconnect those. And so kind of associated with the intersectionality is this notion of matrix of domination, where there's these identities that are in tandem working together, and they're oppressive. So typically in this matrix of domination, Patricia Collins, who's one of my colleagues at the University of Maryland, wrote this great book called Black Feminist Thought. And in the matrix, she has race, she has class, and she has gender. And those can be in tandem working together and can be oppressive. So if you're a poor Black woman, that's going to mean something in America. So my argument in the book is that in this matrix of domination, it should be race, class, gender, and singleism. And the reason why I'm saying that, I'm not suggesting that singleism is as oppressive as racism, but what I am suggesting is that singleism permeates every social institution just like racism does. So I thought people were going to push back on that argument, like, how dare you put singleism up there with racism, da 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 da. Nobody pushes back on that, which is fine. Where I get pushback is to the point that you're making about these augmented families. One of the arguments I make in the book is that Kris Marsh, and the Census Bureau do not show up as a family, because if we think about family, the family definition, which the Census Bureau uses, which in some ways I consider the gold standard, right, in some ways, it's someone that you're related to by blood, marriage, or adoption. Because I live by myself and I'm not related to anybody by blood, marriage, or adoption. I do not show up in the census data as a family. I show up as a household, but not a family. Let me tell you where that's highly problematic for me. I'm going to give you 3 quick examples. Kris Marsh, want to be a family of one because I want the benefits of what comes along with a family. For example, I want to go to Verizon and get a discount on my one cell phone. It's a benign example, but you understand the point of what I'm trying to get to. Number 2, I'll be 50 in August 3rd. I'm going to South Africa. There's a lovely little island on the east southern coast. I'm going to live my very best life in South Africa at Mauritius, on the island of Mauritius for my 50th birthday. Single occupancy is more expensive than double occupancy. And then the one that everybody can wrap their mind. So I want to be the Marsh family that checks in for my vacation and Mauritius for my 50th birthday and get that discount. Yes. The one that everybody's going to shake their head to and understand, they're going to be like, yeah, Dr. Marsh, I'm feeling you. The tax structure. The tax structure has a built-in singlehood penalty in the tax structure. And there's a great book by Dorothy Roberts. She comes out of the law school. She's a lawyer. And she wrote this great book called The Whiteness of Wealth. Her argument is that we should all file as single, because there's some advantages in married couple households. We should all file as single. I'm like, okay, I think the book is beautifully done. If we can't file as single, I would argue that we could all file as a family. And I want to file as a Kris Marsh family and get my tax benefit as a family. I was on a radio show and I was like, I want to talk about, she's like, anything you want to talk about? I was like, yes, I want to talk about being a family of one. She was like, that's absurd. We're going to break. I was like, hey, your mic is hot. people, and here's the thing. Here's where I think this really becomes a problem. I think it's insidious. If you buy my argument that structural forces constrain personal choices, and then you're discriminating against me because I'm not a family, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And so the way in which we define, and I'm not that person that's like, I want to change terms and da 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 da. But I want you to understand what you're doing when you think about family and how we think about family in very, very, very distinct kind of ways. So the book tries to push back against that. So that's where I get the most pushback. Family of one, like that's just absurd. And I had a colleague who even called me. She's like, Kris, I can't believe you're making that argument in your book. It's like, and I don't, again, I don't really care about the term family, but I don't want to be disadvantaged because I don't have anybody else in the household. You can call anything you want. You can call me ABC or XYZ, but I just want the benefits that other families get.
Well, I think I used the wrong term because you were discussing the fact that single folks.
Oh wait, hold on, I didn't finish my question.
Networks.
I was like, I didn't finish my question. I answered. So we got the family of one. If you don't buy my family of one argument, there's also in the book we talk about augmented families. And I drew from Andrew Billings' work. He's an older sociologist that wrote many years ago. It's really interesting because there's a white anthropologist who talked about black families, and she talked about fictive kinship, and people like cite her all the time. But I didn't want to do that. I really didn't want to do that. I'm not going to call her name or anything. And I told one of my students that the scholar was white, and she almost fell off her chair. She had no clue. So Andrew Billings, he talks about these augmented families. And one of the things that I found in my research, I interviewed 62 people. I interviewed 74 people. We had to settle on 62. We had to discount 11 people or so, and we can talk about why that is. But the women developed friendships. Friendships were key to living a single lifestyle. And they had that thing on lock. They did that thing beautifully. Men, in fact, did not do it all that well. Women had non-romantic nurturing relationships. And so I think we can use these non-romantic nurturing relationships. And if two women who aren't in a romantic relationship want to develop a family so they can get their family cell phone plan, I'm about it. If they want to go on vacation as a family, I'm about it. If they want to file taxes together, I think that that's a good idea. Because we need to think about how we are like discriminating in plain sight about the term family. And again, friends play a central role in the success of single lifestyle. It was clear among the women. The men did not have non-romantic nurture relationships to the same degree as the black women did in my cohort. And part of the reason why they said that they did not is because if they were to have these non-romantic nurturing relationships, they would think of as being gay, thought of as being soft, thought of as being, have some issues. And what's really kind of interesting though is that they use their friends for utility purposes, like to move a couch or to play in a sporting event, but they wouldn't have these deep, non-romantic, nurturing kind of conversations. So one of the things that I do hope comes out of the book is I hope we can normalize non-romantic, nurturing relationships for black men. You can be in a close relationship with another black man. That doesn't make you gay. That doesn't make you soft. But black women they have done that. They've done it really well. They clearly lay it out in the book. And the friends play a really central role in how they navigate their singlehood. So I think at some point we really should normalize these non-romantic relationships. And if these non-romantic relationships want to partner up and become a family, I think we need to think about that. What would be so wrong if we did that? Why would it be such an issue?
But it's more communal.
Right. But one last thing I want to say related to that too, though, is that and because you're the marriage family therapist, we're speaking that into existence, speak those things that are not as though they are. We talk so much about like when you're in a marriage, your marriage gets a little crunchy, you can go see a therapist, right? You can Google and see 1,000 therapists, 1 million therapists for like relationships with marriages when they get a little crunchy. I think we also need to normalize friends going to see therapists when things get a little crunchy as well. We don't normalize that. But here's what's kind of like baffling to me. I mean, it's so simple. It's like,
I was going to ask you, did you talk to your friend yet? Did you mention that?
Okay, so what had happened was, I had a real dear girlfriend of mine, and her dog died. I'm not a dog person. No disrespect. I'm not a dog person. So I thought rest in peace with a sad face emoji was enough. In a text message. I mean, quite all right. I did the sad face. You know, okay. So she has not talked to me. I think I was supposed to get on a one-way ticket to Los Angeles, like when her dog died. And we were friends for over 20 something. Well, I thought we were friends, but I guess this kind of like shows maybe we weren't. But if we were friends for over 20 years, and I miss our friendship, I really, really do. I tried to reach out to her, but she just doesn't. She didn't reach back out. And so my therapist was like, "You gonna keep calling? You just gonna keep calling?" She doesn't. She clearly doesn't want to talk to you. But I think if we could have gone to a therapist and she understood that I'm not a dog person and she was a dog person, we might still be friends now. But we don't normalize going to therapy for our friends. We go for our marriages. But here's what's baffling to me. Like in the most basic kind of sense. But with any marriage, aren't you supposed to be friends first anyway? Okay, well, all right, okay.
Meanwhile, most married couples go to therapy 7 years too late. So it's like they're not even utilizing therapy when they need to. And on top of that, now what I will notice, what I have noticed is that there is a focus now shifting towards friendship. Like in terms of books, like there's been a lot more books about friendship, especially by Black women. There's more talk about the hurt of friendship breakups.
Yes.
You know, so I think it's happening. Like that is starting to happen and become more apparent to us. But I think it's also because it is so hard, particularly for us, to find partners, and they're making it not just Black people.
Right.
Like it's hard for Americans to find partners.
Right.
And especially around this little crunchy childbearing age, whatever BS. And
Right.
so it's, you know.
Right. So 2 points I want to make about that. I think those are that's really great. And I have therapists who have called me like, Dr. Marsh, thank you so much. I'm giving the book to like my clients because yes, we need to have these kind of like friend relationships, and you need to come talk to a therapist because they're just as important. Which bleeds right into my next statement, or dovetails into my next statement. It's really interesting how we think about marriage. It is not easy to go in places and talk about singlehood because being married and partner is an albatross around our neck, and people think that I am the devil incarnated because I'm trying to talk about singlehood. And but here's what's so funny. I'm like, it's a basic question, but I ask people, I'm like, I want you to think about, why do you want to be married? It's a simple question, but it's got a lot of things that you have to think about. And so here's what's kind of interesting. I have a friend of mine, this guy I know, and so he's like, I just like light-skinned women.
Oh, please tell him.
So every time he says that, or he says I like light-skinned women, I just take a real long pregnant pause, and I'm like, no, you don't. Here's the deal: you've been conditioned from a very young age that thinks closer to white is right. And I wish you would say, I've been conditioned since the age of 3, and I fell right into it, hook, line, and sinker, and I want to marry me anything light as close as white. You got to look at her ID to know she's Black. I can respect you and appreciate that. But if you just say, I like Black, light-skinned women, I was like, no, you don't. Similar to marriage. We've been told from a very young age that we have to be married. We want the white dress. We want the big wedding and all that kind of stuff. Why do you want to be married? People say, I want to be in relationships. I'm like, you got to quantify what exactly you mean. Or you got to clarify what you mean. You are in non-romantic, nurturing relationships. Don't underestimate the friends that you have. You may not have romantic relationships, but we're constantly in all types of relationship. Why does it have to be a romantic relationship? And I think from a very young age, we're conditioned that way. And because we're conditioned that way, we end up with anything. And I wanted to go talk to, I really wanted to go in the Black church and talk to people in the Black church about my book. The Black church hasn't quite reached out to me yet and asked me to come and have a conversation because I am a woman of faith, but I was like, you got to give more to the singles and like how to stay single and safe. And I'm like, come on. And
but like, it's not even about that. It's not about that at all. It's about the fact that the structural forces are literally, and the psychological forces, I told you this before. I believe the companion book to this book is Black Women, Black Love, America's War on African American Marriage by Diane Stewart. She did that. Like this is like, if you want to know why we're all so single, those two books. That's it. Like the end. Because it's not like we keep having the wrong conversation.
Right.
And Dr. Stewart talks about phenotypic stratification.
Yes.
And how, like you said, the light brights get married first. So
listen, like as a sociologist, you can say that, a scholar, you can say there's things that you didn't know. It's like, there's also hair privilege, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I got 3C, but I ain't got no air conditioner in my car, so I had to turn stuff down, so I wasn't sure what it was going to look like. I was going to have a black little cotton ball by the time I got here, so I had to just move. But there's hair privilege. We need to think about that. That kind of comes into the conversation all the time. We need to talk about that. And I talk about it. I'm like, you're a colorist. I was like, you're just a colorist. I talk about it in the book. Talk about in the footnotes. Here's a key to the book. So my publisher said to me, he said, that I want to talk about wealth real quick. So my publisher said to me, Kris, or Dr. Marsh, sometimes you go off on a tangent. Can you imagine who's like me going off on a tangent? Come on. He said, sometimes you go off on a tangent. If you feel like you're going off on a tangent in your writing, put it in a footnote, but try to keep your footnote to a minimum. I have 120 footnotes.
Oh my gosh, the footnotes, they're like half the page.
Let me tell you, the footnotes is where the juicy stuff is. The footnotes.
What is going on? I've never seen
the good stuff is in the footnotes, and I'm a lazy reader. And so I was not going to put the footnotes in the back of the book, because if you put a footnote in the back of the book, I'm never going to read it, because I'm not flipping pages. It's at the bottom of the page. All you got to do is look down to read your footnotes. So please read the footnotes. There's really juicy stuff in the footnotes. We can do a really just golden nugget about what's in the footnote. Then we'll talk about wealth. So one of the things we talked about, because we talked about like middle class, how do you define middle class? I'm a scholar who defines middle class and beyond. So there's some people that say you're lower middle class, middle middle class, or upper middle class. A lot of my sociological colleagues say that. I'm like, either you in it or you not. I don't care how far you in the middle class, but as long as you call yourself middle class, you in middle class, you in. I don't care how elite you are. But if you're in it, you're in it. And that's the difference with some of the other scholarship. So I spent a lot of time talking about, well, who's middle class and what kind of responsibility they have. And so I talked to respondents, and they talked about their responsibility to the larger Black community, being single, what their responsibility means. Because what we do know in the social science literature is that a single person's paycheck, checkbook, and time becomes the extended family time. Because I, Kris Marsh, don't have a partner. It's like, well, we can have Kris take grandmother to the podiatrist. Or if we want to borrow some money, we can call Kris because she ain't got no kids, so she could be over there eating popcorn for dinner, which I'm cool with that, by the way. But because I don't have children, it's okay to just call me and ask me for stuff. So one of the things that was really important to me is I wanted to make real sure that I thought about singles in a very thoughtful kind of way. So I spent time talking about like their lifestyles and what responsibility they have to the larger community. So one of the golden nuggets, one of the things that respondents said is they talked about W.E.B. Du Bois's notion of the talented 10. Simply put, W.E.B. Du Bois said 10% of the Black population are going to lift up all of Black America. He pushed back against his own idea years later. But what's interesting is that the respondents talked about W.E.B. Du Bois and the talented 10. So I, as a scholar, had to be sensitive to the literature. And so I did that in the body of the text, but in a footnote, I noted that during the same time that W.E.B. Du Bois was writing, there was another scholar who was writing that talked about a groundswell. If you improve the life chances of Black women, you will improve the life chances of everybody. That scholar's name was Anna Julia Cooper, one of the first Black women to get a PhD. Most people don't know Anna Julia Cooper. They know W.E.B. Du Bois. Part of the reason why they know W.E.B. Du Bois is because he was a gatekeeper and wouldn't let Anna Julia Cooper's work be published. Now, the academic skedaddle is that he even plagiarized some of her work later on in life. I, as a Black female scholar, could not write a book and not have Anna Julia Cooper in my book, so I had to put it in a footnote, because it doesn't necessarily relate to the conversation, but it ends up being in a footnote. So thinking about lifestyle, thinking about how they respond to the larger Black community, one of the things that was really important to me was thinking about like how they accumulate wealth and how they disseminate wealth, because they're single and living alone.
And I noticed that you have a very, like, I think you're about to go into this, so you had a very specific criteria for the Black middle class, that they had to own a house or some type of property, that they had to be above the median income for Black middle class or for Black folks in general.
Yeah.
That they had to have a college degree, at least a bachelor's degree, and there are a couple other.
There's 4. Lord, let me think. I can't like. Hold on. Give me a minute. Let me think. So I did some quantitative work and I built like these models to show that there is this demographic group. So it's really funny because I built statistical models. I used national data. And I had to do this thing for CNN. They asked me to do this blog and they asked me to do this video blog thing. And so I said, okay, I'll do it, but I'm not reading my comments. So for whatever reason, this video thing just blew all the way up. And I got like 1 million hits or something like that. They're like, got a ton of comments. They're like, Dr. Marsh, will you please go read your comments and respond? I was like, I told you from the beginning, I don't read my response, the comments, I'm not gonna do it. They said, what about if we just pull some out and send it to you and you respond? So I was like, okay, give me 10. I was like, and they were like, we're not gonna give you the really bad ones. I was like, gosh, if these are the really bad ones, I don't wanna see the real bad ones. But one guy said to me, he's like, Dr. Marsh published this article. She probably just talked to 10 of her girlfriends in the hair salon. I was like, that's a reminder that I haven't been to the hair salon in 12 years. Okay. So I was like, I used national data, but still disrespect the research. So after I'd done that, I was like, I really wanted to talk to people and have a conversation with people. And I say in the book that I wanted to put metaphorical meat on the numeric bones that I had built over the years, because it's one thing to say that show the trends with statistics, it's another thing to have a conversation about them and talk to the people and have them give me more context. So on the quantitative side, there were 4 measures that you needed to be middle class. It was education, income, occupation, and home ownership. So in a real basic kind of sense, I took all Black households. I took all Black households. I looked at households over the age of 25. I calculated the mean for all Black households. If you're above the mean or the median, don't remember which one it was, you received a 1 on the Black middle class index that I developed. If you were owning or bought a home, you received a 1. And the reason why I used homeownership is because I was using census data and they didn't have a lot of other assets, so I had to settle on homeownership as a kind of a proxy for wealth. I looked at a bachelor's degree. If anybody in the household had a bachelor's degree or higher, you were considered a 1 on the index. And I looked at occupational score. There's a score from 0 to 88, I believe. If you were above the mean for the occupational score, you received a 1. If you got a 4 on the index, you were considered middle class. Here's the point, though, with the quantitative work that I did. So I like Aretha Franklin. So let's use an example of someone named Aretha. If Aretha had an MBA, she was making $250,000, and she lived in National Harbor and rented a loft, she would not show up in my data set because she didn't have any kind of wealth indicator or wealth building asset. I'm not putting a value judgment on homeownership. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to align with the literature. And the literature talks about the fragility of the Black middle class, how they're 1 or 2 paychecks away from poverty, especially when something like a global pandemic happens. So because of that, I used homeownership. And people push back against that all the time. But the reality is homeownership wasn't even the hardest variable to load on the index. It was actually education. So there's more people because 33% of the U.S. population have bachelor's degree or beyond, so that was the hardest variable. So I did that on the quantitative side, but on the qualitative side, when I interviewed the respondents, I was able to relax the standards just a bit, and if they defined themselves as middle class, we talked about what they meant, what that actually meant for them. But to the point that I was making about wealth, so one of the things that was really important to me in this book, I didn't want to keep having this conversation like, why aren't single people getting married? I want to talk about what they are doing. They're living full lives. They're thriving. Why does it always have to be a deficit conversation? Oh, what was me? Why aren't you married?
It goes to the point of our socialization patterns in our life, like the Erickson model, right? Like if you're at the stage where I'm at, young adulthood, if you don't reach certain milestones, then you are not considered a young adult. If you don't get married and have a home and have a stable career that provides you everything, you are not considered an adult in the American mindset.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's true. It's absolutely true. And so I'm like, hey, these are adults. They are doing they are adulting, and they're adulting really well. So one of the things I really wanted to talk about is I wanted to think about, like, how do they accumulate wealth? When do they decide when they're going to buy, like, homes or start businesses? Where do they choose to live? Because some people call children money grubby leeches. I'm not sure if that's true or not because I don't have any. But if I don't have any children, do I make similar or different decisions as to where I want to live? And so one of the things, here are the 2 best compliments that I've gotten from the book so far. People have said, I feel seen, Thank you. I feel seen. And people said that I have learned something. I was in Prince George's County at a public library, and in the book I talk about wills and living trust. 30% of Black Americans have a will or a living trust. Aretha Franklin, a girl, did not have a will or a living trust. Neither did John Singleton. Neither did, I don't know if Prince did either. High profile folks. That was a premature death. So we didn't really think that was going to happen. In the cohort, 25% have a will or a living trust. And so I am a professor, so I want to kind of make this book a teaching moment too. I don't care how little you have, I don't care how much you have. Put that thing in a trust to make sure that if something were to happen to you, God forbid, but if something were to happen to you, have somebody know exactly where you want your stuff to go. I had a white woman who was married, who was 49 years old. She's like, Dr. Marsh, I didn't know what a living trust was. My husband and I are now working on a living trust. And I was like, yes. But especially if you're not married and you don't have any children, I really want to make sure the Love Jones Cohort have their trust in place. I have a living trust and will. But I think it's important for us to all have it because something just might happen. And I talk about how sometimes we just don't want to trust certain institutions. And that's part of the reason why we may not do it. And it's funny because I have had estate planning and wealth management companies come to me like, how can we tap into this market? I was like, if you want to do it in a non-exploitive kind of way, we can have the conversation. But if you're going to do it in an exploitive kind of way, I'm not here for that. But think about it though, when you watch these Charles Schwab commercials or these estate planning commercials, you see same-sex couples, you see single parents, but you have not seen a single person yet. And we need to think about that.
And to your point, in general, about the discrimination essentially of singleness, they're basically not checking for us. They're not checking for people who are unpartnered. They're not checking for people who don't have children. They're not checking for you.
Right, because we're the other.
Yeah.
We're the other, and we're not contributing citizens because we don't have a partner. You can be same sex, be opposite, you ain't got a partner, you don't count. You're overlooked. This book, and people have said this is starting to it's a movement. You're starting to let people be seen. Again, Black love is a beautiful thing. Absolutely. But you gotta love yourself first, stand confidently in your singleness. Live your best life because you don't want to put your life on hold in hopes that it might happen. One of the things in the book, the men talk about how it's a matter of time before they do partner. And women say that they hope that they do partner, but they often also said that they're not willing to just settle with anything. They'd much rather be singles. That's one gender difference that came up, which as a scholar, I grapple with what that actually means, and I go back and forth.
Well, I think that personally, because I've heard you say this a lot, and I've read part of that as well. I'm like, I personally think it's it goes back to socialization. Many women aren't gonna ask a man to marry them. Right. But we expect it to maybe happen. Considering the circumstances around whatever romantic relationship you're in. Men pick a woman to marry. Then that changes the conversation completely. If you are seeking, or even if you're not seeking, you still always have the option. Versus waiting, you're just waiting.
Right.
There's no real control in that. And if you do try to control the situation, you step outside of the box of our social norms. And when you step outside of those boxes, who about to marry you?
Right.
Right. Because how many men in here would accept a proposal from a woman? Look at y'all. I knew y'all would raise your hand. But it's some of y'all would look like. I'm sorry, what? You said, and don't let her have a ring. Good God, right.
Right, but I do think I grapple with that because it's okay, so the women are hopeful that it happens, and I want to be balanced. I want to be balanced in my assessment of the book and the respondents. So for the most part, people were very happy with their singlehood. They were living these beautiful lives. They had these wonderful lifestyles. Now there were moments where they had loneliness. But they talked about it, and I think I coined it in the book as situational loneliness. It wasn't this chronic loneliness where you put the sheets up over your head and you're in the fetal position, you can't get out of bed for 10 days. Not that. They would have situational loneliness around the holidays, around Valentine's Day. Everybody's got somebody to kiss. Everybody's got somebody to give flowers to. Again, to the point, if you have a non-romantic relationship, send your friends flowers, and chocolate? Why do we have to always think about it in romantic kind of ways? Or like New Year's Eve, you know, that you always want to kiss somebody when the clock strikes 12. I'm going to have to kiss my girlfriends. We're going to kiss on the cheek, but we're going to kiss her if we have to, if it's going to go down. But I also think it's important to understand that when they talked about these situational lonely spurts that they have, they also talked about how they had friends, and friends helped them through that whole entire situation. So I just want to make sure that I am kind of balanced. But so they're like, okay, I'm cool with my life. I'm doing my thing. If it happens, great. But if it doesn't happen, I'm okay too. I'm not going to settle. But men just pick somebody. And so I'm like, are you just picking? Are you just settling? Are you picking the least, the least of two evils, lesser of two evils? You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
That statement right there. What's going on there? And that's unfortunate because I don't want to be just picked. And I also think, like, what kind of relationship is that going to be if you're like, well, then I'm getting older, so I'm just going to choose you. That's going to be,
Let me not say what I'm going
right. But then what we do know, if you look at the research, I was like, but then we know that lighter skinned women are going to be in the queue first. So you're going to pick the lighter skinned woman first, which is the halo effect. I talk about all that in the book, in the footnotes. You got to read the footnotes.
The footnotes, y'all.
Footnotes is where it's at. I'm trying to tell you.
Man, now, I want to talk about one of the last things before I open up to y'all, because I know y'all itching. I can feel your energy. How do we get people to have the right conversation, and in terms of like what to do next, right? Because we understand that after you read this, you will understand that it's a structural issue. But like, what policies can we push to make this not so much of a structural issue, if we can?
Right, so I think, and it's funny because I'm going to talk to the University of Michigan School of Public Policy in a couple of weeks. I just got my itinerary today. And there are some policy implications in the book. And so I talk a lot about like wealth and wealth disparities. I was having a conversation with my girlfriend just yesterday about reparations. So I had to do a thing for BET. BET has a new series called America in Black. They found the book and asked me to do an interview. It was a 2-hour interview. They took 30 snippets of my 2-hour interview and put it up on social media. Like Dr. Marsh said, if you want to change marriage rates, pay Black Americans reparations. And I was like, well, I did say what I said.
I see no lie.
And they drugged me in them comments. Like, where'd she get her PhD in a Cracker Jack box? She's just a money grubber, she a gold digger, this, that, and the other. But listen, I think what we have to understand is that it's a structural conversation. And whether or not, I don't care how you feel about reparations, if you were to give Black people access to capital, that would probably open up the dating market. And I would have more choices to choose from. If my theory is wrong and if the marriage rates don't change, if we actually were paying reparations, at least Black folks got reparations. So either way, I'm cool with it. I would admonish you to think about how do you define family? I think that there's real policy implications in that. You should be able to be a family of one, and or you should be able to have like these augmented family. Of course, you got these people that say, oh, so that means I can marry my dog now, or this, that, and that. I was like, we're gonna wait till that happens, but until then, what we do know is happening.
Why people gonna try it first? So I'm sorry. Like what?
But that's how people think. They're like, oh my God, well, if I'm gonna marry my best friend, if I'm gonna develop a relationship with my best friend, then I can marry my dog. I'm like, really? Like, I don't really know how we even got there. But like a process. But sometimes, but I think it's important. I think in some ways, family is it's an antiquated term, and I think Black people, we're not a monolithic, or we're not a monolith, and I think we've got like so much variation and so much variety within our community that we should be thinking about Black love and just broaden the standards just a little bit. I'm not saying that families are a bad thing, but let's just allow more people to be defined as a family. Those are policy implications. So those are the things I would hope that we really take the conversation forward and see if we. I had to do a talk. I'm very rarely nervous about doing a talk. I had to do a talk at the Census Bureau, and I was talking about a family of one. Man, it was a little quiet on that Zoom. They never. But see, it's. I'm not saying anything that you don't already know. I'm just saying it in a different kind of way. And the Census Bureau was like, I was like, you couldn't be discriminating against me in plain sight and don't even realize it. And it's not it's me. Whether I'm choosing to be single by choice or force, I have to understand there's structural forces that constrain my choices, whether or not I'm single now or not. And then you don't even allow me to be defined as a family? Come on now. So those are some of the policy implications I think the book really speaks to.
Well, what, like snaps on that. Thank you, Dr. Marsh. Thank you so much. I want to open it up to y'all. And just, give her a round of applause. Let's start there. Because I mean, between y'all's books, like, I know everything. I need to, I'm just like, when people, we constantly have this conversation, but we've been having it from, and there's no shade to Brother Steve, but we've been having it from the Steve Harvey perspective since that book came out. Right. Since Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man came out. Right. And we've been talking about it around in this circle for years, for a decade. That book came out over a decade ago, which is crazy. But I digress. And I'm just happy that we're actually having the right conversation, because as someone who was in undergrad when that book came out, and that kind of really sparked my own interest in Black family research and Black couples and things like that. It was bleak hearing all this stuff as like 19-year-old, 20-year-old, just starting out in whatever this adulthood is, and Black woman, you're not going to find a partner. Oh yeah, Black woman, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do that. But you may have all the degrees and all the things, but right. It's thank you. Like,
I just want to say one more thing before we open it up for questions. And I appreciate you for saying that. And it gets back to the point that I was making about, why do you want to be married? Why do you want to be in a romantic relationship? And some people, I can see the little bubbles above your head, and you're like, so I want some sex. Here's what's really interesting about the book. Some people might be saying that. I interviewed 62 people. 2 people talked about sex. And I called my colleague and I was like, should I even know that people just did not talk about sex? And I grappled with that. I think I put it in a footnote. I'm not sure if my editor left it in or not. I don't, but I know I put it in a footnote, because I wanted to say that people didn't talk about sex. And I remember I did a book talk this a little while ago, and there was a woman there who was like, Dr. Marsh, I'm feeling you. I don't need a man. And like these non-romantic nurture relationships, I really value those of my friends. But every now and then I want myself a little piece. And, right, okay. So did the people talk about that? What did they say about sex? And I was like, wait a minute. Only 2 people mentioned it. I put it in a footnote. But I think what we have to be really careful about is that sometimes people often equate being single with being promiscuous. And I think single folks out there getting it every single night and twice on Sunday. And we all know married folks probably get it without their spouses, but they get they could be getting it as well. But the thing is that they automatically make this assumption. And it only showed up twice out of 62 people that I interviewed. And one woman, we talked about like self-care, we talked about like coping mechanisms, and she just said, sometimes she just wants somebody to hold her, and she wants a little peace. And then one of the guys said something about, his name was Joseph, I think. He said something like, I just have somebody that we have friends with benefits, so I'm just okay with the friends with benefits. The only time it came up. And then people were like, well, maybe you didn't ask the right questions. I was like, well, why did it have to come up? Why are we equating being promiscuous with singlehood? But people do it more often than not. So I'm trying to push back against that kind of idea as well in the book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But again, it gets back to this point about we have these non-romantic nurture relationships, and there's something about those. So it's like, why do you want to be in the romantic relationship? I think it's because we were told.
Honestly, the partner has to be able to be added to the friend group. That's the point. Like, because you can't just be you're right. Yeah, I myself have plenty of friends. I have a great friend group. If whoever my partner is cannot be added to that friend group, then they're not my partner.
Right. But I also think what's kind of important, and I think someone in the book mentioned, I can't remember his name, I think his name might have been Lafayette, I can't remember. He talked about how he had back surgery. He wanted somebody to kind of like be there for him. And one of the things that I kind of noticed in the book as well is that men put and some of the research kind of suggests this as well, men put all of their eggs in the marriage basket. So their partner becomes like their lover, their cook, their secretary, their executor. They become everything. Black women, we got that thing on lock. We got ourselves a set of church friends, we got our golf friends, we got our business friends, we got our brunch friends, and we have like a really big network of friends. Men don't necessarily have that. Like, get yourself some play dates, because that's exhausting to put all that on one person. Get yourself some play dates, get yourself some non-romantic friends, do some stuff with your friends, I'll do stuff with my friends, but then we'll come together as well. But unfortunately, some black men, especially black men in the book, really didn't have those kind of relationships.
That part. And we're gonna go to questions. I'm gonna look and see if we have any. We have a lot of comments online. My God.
I got my glasses on, so
Okay.
we can take the audience first.
Yes, audience, what's going on?
Can you please say your name when you give your question?
Yeah. Hi, Nicole. Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I just want to make a comment. I think it's curious in 23 we're equating or conflating being in a relationship with having sex. I mean, the two shouldn't be mutually exclusive. So it's interesting that that keeps coming up in your talks or in these discussions. But what my question was around there being a political home for this work, as you've published the book and started your talks, are there advocacy organizations or civic organizations who have come to you, particularly given the idea around changing the rule around definition of the family with the Census Bureau? That could be a rule change or something like that. So you have the policy suggestions. Is there a political home for this work for it to continue and to be more built out?
So I think that is Nicole, both of those statements are absolutely fabulous. And again, it's like people literally argue me down. Like, well, you just didn't ask the right questions. I'm sure that they probably want to talk about it. Maybe they didn't feel comfortable talking about sex around you. I was like, why did they have to talk about it?
I would think this cohort would be very comfortable. I mean, if they're educated and yeah.
Right. I know how much you make. Right. So, but people are like, there has to be an error in some ways. Like, why are we equating relationships and singlehood with sex? But it's unfortunate. People argue me down all the time. Like, you must answer the right question. I hope this finds a political home. The book came out February 8th. The audiobook is coming out August 8th. And I am not narrating the audiobook. I'm not saying because I talk fast, but I'm saying some of y'all listen slowly. So, but since some of y'all listen slowly, they told me I could not narrate the book. But so it just came out, so it's still starting to it's gaining momentum. But I do hope that politicians' policies really do start to shape around the book. It hasn't quite happened yet, and groups haven't quite reached out to me yet. But I am hopeful that it does happen sometime in the very near future. So thank you for those two questions, Nicole.
All right, hi, my name is Alpha Jiri. Yes, I have two questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
So I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know Cuba passed a family code recently that kind of enshrines some of what you're talking about with the augmented family. So people's extended family units or however they organize, they can still be recognized by the government. So I was wondering, do you know anything about that and how would you compare? Okay, yeah, my question would be how would you compare it to, the singleism that you're identifying in the US, but yeah, hopefully, I'd love to see what you think about it once you kind of learn more about it.
That is fantastic, and I think that's great that Cuba is there, and hopefully we can get there sometime in the very near future. I don't know the policy, but I do think where I'm kind of maybe slightly making a different argument is that I want people that may not have any kind of blood tie to be able to develop relationships. I have my girlfriend who's I'm the godmother to her daughter. Like, we have no kind of ties in a familial kind of way, but we should be able to develop some kind of augmented family because God, I'm paying for my goddaughter for this, that, and the other. I need to write her off on my taxes some kind of way. So I just think that it can be extended family, but I think it also could be people that we aren't necessarily directly in our family. That's where I'm thinking we should be able to develop these augmented families. And people are going to push hard back against that. But I'm like, but why? Because we're just stuck into these terms? Is that why?
Okay, yeah, so my second question was, so your statistical models, if you tweak them to reflect the criteria that were identified by the people that you spoke with in your qualitative studies, how do you think the results from those models might change, compared to the criteria you're using now?
So the only thing I think would be a little bit different is that some people in the cohort did not own homes in the qualitative work. In the book, they did not own homes, but they had some kind of assets. So that would be, instead of having a high rate of home ownership in this book versus the quantitative work, they would just have some kind of assets. People had precious metals and golds, and they had businesses. But in the census data, I wasn't able to parse all that out, so I used home ownership as a proxy. But at the end of the day, they do have some kind of wealth building assets in case there is a global pandemic. But the numbers would look a little different for home ownership.
Thank you.
My name is Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
Yes, hello, Dr. Marsh. Thank you for this. This has been amazing. My mom was like, I was like, oh my God, I can't ask 4,000 questions. But it's good, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. But I really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you both. Thank you, Christina. Excellent job. But living here in the district, in DC, not technically the DMV, but DC specifically, that at one time the marriage rate was very low and the divorce rate very high. And with that being said, there was this issue of singleness and so many women to one man and so on and so forth. And for years, I've heard Black women, very successful Black women in the middle class, single women, with their own homes, degrees, all that, the checklist, check, not being able to find suitable partners or not being chosen by suitable partners, and how this becomes a city that kind of thrives off of everybody being Himalayan, player from the Himalaya type thing. That is what goes down here. So wanting to know about your cohort, to like what demographics as far as like what locations, and then also I wanted to ask about if you've heard of the Gaikuyu women in Africa and how they actually marry in order to be able to preserve land ownership. So that is something that goes on there, but it really wanted to understand, looking at city demographics as opposed to rural areas, so on and so forth. And third, you don't have to ask. Let me pick whatever. Essence had an article found. It was in 1970s. On this very issue about Black successful women, and they had this long article. That thing was hilarious on one end, but serious on the other because people were really struggling with this issue in the Black community. So.
Okay, Tracy. I'm gonna try to remember the three questions.
Okay, you can tell she has a PhD too.
Okay. So a couple comments. So I appreciate, and I didn't say this. I didn't talk a lot about like the structure of the book and how many people I interviewed and why I had to discount people and so on and so forth. But everybody that I interviewed was in the DMV. The DC, Maryland, and Virginia area, all 62 people. And I think that that's really important because I do think like in some ways there may be a selection bias in the book because you do have a lot of singles in this area. So it's probably easier to be single in the DMV than it is to be in Mobile, Alabama, which is where my father is from. I couldn't put everything in the book. So hopefully I have some graduate students that will pick up the baton and move the conversation forward and challenge me and say, this works in the DMV, but it actually doesn't work in rural areas. It doesn't work in the Deep South, nor does it work in parts of California possibly. But for now, this is the cohort that I interviewed and they are in the DMV and we're seeing some unique trends. And I appreciate the conversation that you're having about all these single Black women, they can't find suitable mates. And I actually talk in the book about, there's a book called Is Marriage for White People. It was a law professor, his name is Richard Banks.
Ralph.
I think he's married to Jennifer Eberhard, the psychologist. Google it. I'm pretty sure I
read that book in undergrad.
I hope he is. Anybody online, Google that for me. I think his wife is Jennifer Eberhard, the psychologist. At Stanford or Berkeley, I'm not sure. Sherry's gonna pull out her phone and Google it for me. Thank you, Sherry. But one of the arguments that he makes, like if you want to change marriage rates for Black Americans, and for Black women in particular, Black women should marry non-Black men. So he puts the onus on Black women that we need to expand our horizons and we need to date non-Black men. I talk in the book about how, like on these dating websites, how Black women are the least likely to get winked at, to get chosen, to get swiped. And when they are chosen, when they are swiped, it's kind of like hypersexual kind of thing. It's like, oh, I talk about Venus Hottentot. If you don't know, it's in the footnote. You can talk about it there. But so it's like there's a whole conversation about like, whether or not interracial dating should increase the marriage rate. One, I think the onus shouldn't be on Black women. It shouldn't be on us. But even if we were willing to date interracially, men don't find us, other men, non-Black men, don't find us attractive. Yeah, you got these high-profile cases with the president, with the Supreme Court, but and professional tennis players. But at the end of the day, the data is pretty clear that we're just not considered attractive. They don't find us attractive. And if they do wink at us, it's only for some kind of like sexual favors. So I think that's another part of the conversation we need to have as well. So I tackle the conversation about interracial dating and interracial marriage in the book as well. To your second question, which I have completely and totally forgot. Just give me. The women in Africa. Oh my gosh, I did not know about that group, but I appreciate you for telling me about that, and I will be Googling that when I get home tonight. But here's what's interesting. So I was able to go to South Africa. When the book came out, I called my friends in South Africa. I did 10 book talks in South Africa. I was on a radio show. I'm actually going back in a couple of weeks. They were like, come back, let's see how the book is doing so far after it's been out for a couple of months. And for the most part. Now, what we do know is that there's a high rate of gender-based violence in relationships in Africa, in South Africa in particular, because that's what I know. And so I was like, hey, I think Black love is a wonderful thing, but I think we also want to destigmatize singlehood. We're pushing all of these young girls in particular into these relationships that can be oppressive, toxic, unfulfilling, and abusive. So maybe just kind of celebrate our singleness and stand confident in your singleness and then decide if you want to marry from then. For 98% of the population that I spoke with in the interviews that I talked, people that I talked with were very open. A very small minority were like, don't be bringing the westernized feminist views here. Women want to be married. Women need to be married. They need to have husbands to take care of them, to protect them, and so on and so forth. And then it's so funny because I play willful ignorance. I'm like, I'm just the American telling you the American story. And people will push back. They were like, no, we don't need to do that because when they get in these relationships, we understand there is this high rate of gender violence. So we need to have this conversation. This is exactly what we need to be doing. So I'm happy that they're having this kind of conversation in the South African context, even though I'm coming from the American side, but it really does translate to other countries and other cultures as well. And I have no clue what your last question was. None. Okay, like I just don't.
It's okay. I said you just focus on whatever one because I don't want to take time away from
Okay.
who may, but you answered.
Well, let's give it a last one real quick. I promise I'll give it 30 seconds.
What's what?
Tracy, you can't remember. It was your question.
I know. Amen. Was the
Essence.
come on. The Essence magazine.
Yeah, I mean, so that's why I'm like, okay, it's so exhausting to keep having a conversation. Why are Black women getting married? I literally wanted to write the book without putting a dating chapter in there. And so my editors were, and I didn't want to put a theoretical chapter. So side note, the introduction in chapter 1 are highly theoretical. And that's not your get down. Just fast forward to chapter 2. I wrote the book. And I wanted to peruse through the introduction and the chapter 1. I had to do the copy edit, so I was like, yeah. I was like, okay, I gotta read it because I want to make sure there's no errors. But it gets a little dense and it's a lot. So please just hold on till chapter 2. I promise you, when you get to chapter 2, it's going to be a very different read. So just wait till you get to chapter 2. But at the end of the day, I'm so exhausted. Like, why aren't Black women getting married? I'm like, what else can we talk about? And the book is trying to talk about everything else that they're trying to do because that can be like a ho-hum kind of story. And again, is it really an individual conversation? Is it really just about Black women? Or are there some structural forces that we just ignore? You don't have to buy into it or not, but it's all individual, none of it structural, just none of it. So the book tries to get you to think about how and in what way structure plays into this conversation. Because it's just not there. Okay.
Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Marsh.
Hello, how are you?
Just came in at 2 a.m. Still trying to stay awake.
Glad to see you.
You too. So there's a lot of parallels I'm thinking, and I'm chapter 8 now. Thank you. Amazing book.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if there's a parallel between, let's say, in the 60s and now these gender roles being abolished and more women in the workforce, whether color, non-color, more money circulating in basically America, more companies making money because there's more consumers. And honestly, I don't think this country is trapped between Judeo-Christian values that look at old school politics, that look at, a family of 4 and all that, hence the White House, compared to what's actually going on in the street.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we're kind of fluctuating. So I think what's going to eventually happen 20, 30, 40 years from now, like you said, because it's not just here, it's all over the world. There's going to be more singles. I'm, again, touting the whole thing about my friends getting together, making community, As in Trinidad, we were looking at a property in Trinidad, even though I was there for a wedding. The bride and groom looking at properties for all of us, whether single or married, to kind of buy and retire there, and having community economics more play into it rather than the economics of marriage and the economics of, a legal document saying that you're family rather than we're all like-minded and we all have a mission, so let's become a family. So that's more of a statement than anything.
Yeah, I was like, Kevin, what am I supposed to answer? I ain't got anything to answer in that. I was like, what am I supposed to answer? I don't have anything to answer. Great comment. I love it. But here's what I think. I do think that there's one point that you said that I want to kind of like, I want to support. I support everything that you said. But I also think like, yeah, the labor force does play into the conversation, right? So you have more women, you have more Black women in the labor force. We got certain issues we got to deal with in the labor force. And so because of that, I was like, there's more economic freedom. So in some ways, marriage was an avenue or thought of as an avenue into middle class status. But you have people that are doing the doggone thing. They're middle class and they're not married. That's what some people had to do or thought that's what they had to do. But the tide is changing and you just don't have to be married to be middle class anymore. And the Love Jones Cohort clearly shows you that.
Education is now the avenue to middle class status, and when you're seeing more women going into 4-year and higher education than men now, and that pathway, especially in the DMV area, because I was born in Washington, raised in Silver Spring, living up in Marlboro. I've seen all this. So, like you were saying in the book, I live this every day. So it's interesting. I love it.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a really great point, and I refuse to get it. It's unfortunate that Kevin Samuels is not around, but I'm so glad I did not have to get engaged in conversation with him because I don't follow him. I'm not a fan of his work. But there's a conversation that's being had. There was a conversation that was being had recently about whether or not a professional Black woman could marry somebody that was a bus driver, and whether or not she could marry the bus driver or marry the owner of the bus company. And people are like, how do you feel about that? I was like, I'm not going to engage in that conversation, but here's what I am going to say. Why do we keep policing Black women? Let us be. Let us wear our hair the way we want to wear our hair. Let us have our butts as big as we want them to be. Let us be as loud as we want to be. Let us be as quiet as we want to be. Let us date whoever we want to date, the bus driver, the owner of the bus driver, the entire fleet. Let us be. Why does everybody think that they got to tell Black women what we have to do? It's exhausting. Just let us be. So that's the only response I have to that conversation about buses.
Peace. Thank you for your presentation today. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
My question is around the comments and the critiques that you were getting from people who didn't actually read the book and they had their own preconceived notions. So what can you speak to the just the general state of people these days who, have such strong comments and opinions, but they're not bounded in any fact?
Yeah, I thank you. That's a really great question. I don't know that I necessarily have a great answer, but it's a little frustrating. It's like, okay, I spent 7 years to write this book. I was very thoughtful and deliberate in every word, paragraph, sentence, line, and page. You looked at the title, and you're going to write me a 5-page nastygram based on the title. I was like, and then at first, I never wanted to be that kind of person where I wasn't approachable. I wanted to make sure I was approachable, so I thought I had to respond. I don't have to respond anymore, and I don't respond, and I absolutely don't engage. But it is a little disheartening. It's like I spend so much time. I was like, I have no problems having any kind of conversation with you once you've read the book. But you're not going to argue me down, and you haven't even read the book. Read the first couple of pages. Like, well, the first 10 pages, I saw something. You just read the title and the title only, and now you're just gonna come for me, just gonna drag me. I'm like, that's just it's immature. It's just immature. But I think sometimes people just don't want to take the time to read the book. It's not a book you're just gonna pick up. I'm just gonna go read it tonight. It doesn't quite work like that. You have to kind of sit with it. And I think I give you things to kind of think about, and I drop some golden nuggets. And you have to kind of put it down and think like, wow, Dr. Marsh just said, why do I really want to be married? Why do I want to be married? Do I really want to be married? And why is it we always ask single folks why they're married and why they're single, but we don't ask married folks? We're privileging marriage every single day when we do that. Not saying marriage is a bad thing, but if I got to, and I talk about it in the book, if I have to get my narrative together when I go into spaces, because like, well, you're so nice and you're so pretty and you're so accomplished, why are you single? I'm like, Okay, I have to get a narrative together.
Mhm.
Single folk, married folks have to get their same narrative together too. Why you married? Because I love them. I'm gonna need a little more than that.
Mhm.
But I have to explain, be like, okay, okay, really, are you crazy? Is the other shoe gonna drop soon? I think it's unfortunate that we privilege marriage and single folks are out there and have to fend for themselves. Like we just privilege marriage every day. So I think it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate, and it's kind of hurtful when people just don't take the time to read it, to see the title. Now, I also think there's a beautiful thing about the title. Because I was saying earlier, the Love Jones Cohort. People, black folks kind of like, what? Let me go ahead and just pick this up. 'Cause I just love the title.
Yeah.
Non-black folks look at it and be like, the Love Jones Cohort. What is that? One of my colleagues in criminology, he emailed me like, I'm so fascinated with the title of your book. I bought it. I was like, bitch, thank you. So a good title, it'll play very well. It'll play very, very well. And I was telling somebody the other day, I was in the airport, I was talking to this black man who's married, and I was saying, oh, I wrote this book, you need to buy the book. He's like, well, I'm married, I don't need the book. And I was like, ugh, with a stank attitude like that, she may not be married for long. Here's the thing. Whether or not you're single, whether or not you're black, whether or not you're middle class, this book can resonate with everybody. If you think because you're married, you don't need to read a book about single and you don't need to strengthen yourself individually, okay. But read the book because you have somebody in your network that is single. Figure out how to navigate them and how to stop asking them why aren't they married or why don't they have any children. So everybody can read the book. And here's the interesting thing about single. All of us have held the title at one point in time. Everybody has held the title of single. So the book resonates with everybody. I just inserted myself at the black middle class conversation or on-ramp, but it's just a global conversation. It's a general conversation that you don't have to be black or middle class or single to read the book. Anybody and everybody should read the book.
Talk about an ad, girl. Go up. Go up. Okay? Sell the book. Sell the book. Buy the book, everybody. Buy it.
Like, I
Does
think
anyone have any more questions?
We have a question right here in the.
But she has asked for
Thank you, Dr. Marsh.
Hello.
I'm Kelly Dominique. I appreciate you opening the door to this conversation.
Thank you, Kelly.
So in your chapter, education, occupation, income, and home ownership, can you talk more about the wage penalty associated with perceived physical attractiveness and how that results in lower wages for Black women?
Oh, wow. That's what I said in the book. Okay, like, yeah, she knows what's the page number and everything. Like, I appreciate you, Kelly. That is fantastic. So I talked about, in the book, I talk about, like, colorism. And I talk about how, like, closer to whiteness, people are more, like, thought of as being, perceived as being more attractive. I also talk about the halo effect. And I believe I talk about that in a footnote. And one of the things that we know in, like, the social science literature, the way the halo effect works is, like, in the school age children, people thought of as being more attractive, being lighter skinned and thought of being more attractive. So they almost have like a halo effect. So the teachers spend more time with them, they give them more resources, they get more access to everything at the school level. And then that just translates from elementary school to junior high school to high school, and then to college. So when they get to college, they're more likely to be in professional degrees, or more likely to have higher income. And because they have higher income, they are thought, because they're lighter skinned, they get the higher incomes, they get the better jobs, they get the better access to opportunity, and then that makes them more attractive. And then because that makes them more, the light skin, that makes them more attractive. Then it's cumulative effect. So they get better jobs, they get better income, they have more ability to accumulate wealth, and it starts from a very, very, very young age, and it continues on every single step in their education, income, occupation, where they decide to go to school, who they decide to marry, who decides to marry them, and what occupation they decide to be in. So it's a cumulative effect, and it starts at a very, very, very young age.
That resonated so much with me, being a dark-skinned woman. I've witnessed and lived that. So
yeah, and it's so funny because I did a talk at Howard, and they asked, it was really kind of cool because they did like a screening of Love Jones like the day before, and they had me come and do a talk. And they said, Dr. Marsh, it feels like you're talking to dark-skinned women in the book. And I didn't pick that up, but they felt that I was talking to dark-skinned women. I think that there is an undercurrent about colorism that plays throughout the book, but I didn't necessarily think that I was talking to dark-skinned women. But if it resonates, it resonates. And I appreciate that it doesn't resonate with some people.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, glad you read the whole, you even got a chapter and everything. I'm like, wow, I don't remember saying that. But I say that, I think it's important, but I didn't know what chapter it was in, but I appreciate you. Like, yeah, I was like, whoa, chapter and everything.
I promise this one is way easier, but I had to chuckle because my sister sent me a text this morning of some post she found, and it says, I found out why I'm still single. Apparently, you have to go outside and let people see you. That was for me. And she got hands up, praise God, clapping, laughing, everything. And me, she's married. So, but I just thought that was funny because it constantly comes up. And so that was an example. But do you talk about in your book the impact of enslavement and of religion on singleness? And also that plays into sexual behaviors and habits and so on and so forth. So how does that for you, or based on your research, play into single and living alone for Black men?
Okay, so like I said, one of the things I really wanted to do is I really wanted to be in Black churches talking about singlehood, and it just hasn't quite happened. And I think in the Black church, and I think when we think of not organized religion, I think in some ways, if marriage is done right, it can be a beautiful thing. But if marriage is done wrong, it can be like it can reinforce patriarchy, it can reinforce sexism, it can reinforce a lot of that. And I sometimes feel like the Black church is a little antiquated in their way of thinking, and the Black church can reinforce some of these oppressive ideas around marriage. And the reason why I say that is because I really wanted to be in Black churches having this conversation. But I've only been I had one church, it was out in Columbia, Maryland, which allowed me to come and have a conversation, Kevin's church. But other than that, it's the Black church, I don't know if they're ready for this conversation. And you don't have to agree with me. Let's just have the conversation. Let's just think about what you are doing in your singles ministry, and if you can do something different in your singles ministry. If you can be expansive in your single ministry, and I'm not saying that it can't be married if you want to still have marriage as the outcome. But think about estate planning. Think about these non-romantic nurture relationships, how we can really value those and talk about those and bannerize those in the Black church. And I think the Black church as an institution really could push this conversation forward, but I just don't think that they're ready for this conversation. But I might be premature in my assessment. Maybe the Black churches are going to reach out to me at some point. It just hasn't quite happened yet. Yeah.
Now I want to go to online.
Oh, okay, we got some
God.
online people too.
Goodness, everybody wanted to say something. So, Janae said, family is an antiquated term. Face with purple white eyes. Okay. Someone said, respect. Okay, I don't know what that's about. Someone said AARP members unite.
Right.
Janae said, for sure the tax structure needs amending. Congress makes it an argument and recycle. I know this Janae. Shout out to Janae, still commenting online. She always comes to our events. She's great. Sad a relationship had to end. Some people prioritize pets over people. Someone said I love fur babies. Someone said friendship.
And that's great. It's just not my thing. I was like, judge me not.
Someone said friendships need checkups. Janae said, so the church needs new messaging because many may not marry. Jesus didn't. That's a good point.
Okay.
That's a good point. Marriage is a business arrangement for some. They identify as agnostic. Oh, she was talking about the 4C hair. That's what happened. Okay.
But again, I think as you're going through those, I think it's really important that if we keep trying to push people into marriage, I want us to push people into good marriages, not just marriages for the sake of marriages. And I think some institutions just say, you just need to be married. And I think the Black church is one institution that could.
Oh, Janae said maybe if divorce was less shunned in the church, they would promote being a happy person, single or not. Do not awaken love till it's time. Colorism is real, and many of us perpetuate it. Hi, Janae. She said that. But yes, all of these things are true, and I think the fact that these books came out, your book and Diane's book came out so closely together, it means that more of us are thinking about this.
Yes.
We're thinking about it in the right direction versus the way we've been talking about it since the 70s, since the 80s, since the 90s. We just have been talking about it, but not from this angle and not really addressing the true issue. And I really want to thank you for addressing the true issues. And I hope all y'all buy this book because, it's sitting right there at the register. Kamal's ready to wait for y'all to buy the book. So let's buy the book. And Dr. Marsh is going to sign it for you.
I will stay around and find some books. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much for coming out.
Thank you for coming.